friend.
Hey, how's it going, Angela?
Good. It's so good to finally have you on the podcast. And this is a special moment because we are live and in real life. Usually we do these podcasts over a screen. And so like to be here to see you and feel you and be with you is really special.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to chat, Melissa, today. Not only are we friends, but also we are, I guess, kindred spirits in a lot of ways, from an entrepreneurial perspective, but also from a culture building perspective. Yeah. So I'm excited for you to share your story about you, about Brewpoint. And so let's start there.
Yeah, well, if I can interject with what you just said, because like how we met, I think is pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, so we had done a panel like in 2020 on Zoom.
In the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah. And like, I remember thinking, I feel like I'd be synergistic with this person, but there's so much going on. And so like, I think all we did was like follow each other on LinkedIn.
Yes.
And like, what is it, a couple months ago or maybe 3 to 6 months ago? I was just like,
what is time?
Yeah, I've been seeing all the posts you've been doing. And I was like, I feel like we would be friends and I missed out on something 3 years ago. And so, reached out.
The vibes were happening through the screen.
I was just like, just constantly putting herself out there. I feel like I know what she's all about. Like, I want to connect and we're both in the suburbs. So like, why not? And we hung out and it was awesome. And then we hung out with our husbands and it was awesome. And now we're here.
I know. And we're going to have a bestie like photo shoot.
Yeah, I know, right?
So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of Brewpoint though, have you ever looked on Craigslist for an espresso machine only to buy a coffee shop instead? Because that's the story of Brewpoint Coffee.
Only you.
Yeah.
Only you.
Yeah, and it's as wild as it sounds because 8.5 years ago, me and my 7-month boyfriend, now husband, Angelo, good name, right?
Great name.
We found this coffee shop on Craigslist, no business plan, no like really minimal finances, and we bought this coffee shop within a month. And we're just really dedicated to getting a little bit better every single day. We had enough money to make it work for like a month. Otherwise, we'd have to like close it up pretty much right away because we had literally nothing.
So no risk at all is what you're saying, right?
It was an absurd amount of risk that like, if you told me that like, me and my 7-month boyfriend are going to buy this coffee shop together and like put all our life savings into it and have no like nothing to fall back on, I'd be like, that's a horrible idea. Right? But, 8.5 years later, we did get married pretty quickly within that first year. And now we have 4 coffee shops, coffee roastery, an event space. I'm the co-author of a book called Starting and Running a Coffee Shop. And I've been 6 years on the City of Elmhurst Economic Development Commission. So
amazing.
I've loved this journey. It's been a rocket ship. So,
and just a quick plug. We just had conveniently placed for you all to see, but now you're a thriving coffee shop, community space, which is something we'll talk about later.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the things that we've been talking about quite a bit is the journey of not just opening a coffee shop, but the community you've created and how you think about business. So tell us a little bit just philosophically about
Yeah, so our mission is to build a more equitable and inclusive world through coffee. And that really just is like just getting a little bit better every single day, right? Because being a for-profit business within a very strong capitalistic system and just trying to build this ecosystem that reflects the values that we want to see, it is, for me, a constant compromise, right? Like I feel like I have ideals of what it could look like and what I want it to look like, but I can't do that without resources. And I can't have resources unless I get money, and who has the money, right? And so it is this kind of constant cycle of like building with what I can and getting money from places that don't cause me to lose control, and won't be something that hurts me later on because it's like some sort of bad credit or something of that sort. So like it has been this kind of amazing journey of 8.5 years of just trying to make a better and better and better ecosystem. And for better for worse, what I feel in charge and responsible of feels like it keeps growing. Like, at first it's like, oh, it's the community. And then it's like, and then I realized like, no, it's the community and the team. It has to be the team. And I was like, well, it's also our farmers and it's also our vendors and it's who we choose for all these things that we can make a huge impact on because we have, money is just a way of like it's power to some degree, right? And so like if I can give power to the things I believe in, because I'm given that, like that's the hope, is that it could be this thriving ecosystem where everyone is taken care of as much as you can. And like that's the philosophy of what we're trying to build.
Yeah, and some of the words that come to mind are sustainable, regenerative. You want to build something that is giving back, and it's sustainable in that it doesn't necessarily require you all the time, but your ecosystem is a great word, because you've created the system that is cycling through not just power and influence, but also community and support for your people, which I think is a very different way of thinking, especially in our capitalistic society, which thinks of things as kind of a one-way street, right? Exploit, take, and what you're doing, your philosophy is kind of the opposite, which is interesting. So let's start with just the business part, right? Because there's probably some business owners listening to this and thinking, okay, that sounds great. It sounds like the right thing to do. But is it producing revenue? Are you creating the revenue that you need to keep the ecosystem going?
I'll open up my books a little.
What do we got?
So
tax season's over, but we keep talking about it on this podcast.
So that original coffee shop we bought on Craigslist, it was the revenue for that location started at $180 a day, which is nothing. But that location now has $2,000 to $3,000 a day on average. And we're at this point a multi-million-dollar company. So I mean, in terms of revenue, we have been very, very blessed. I mean, I'm just so grateful for it. Like a lot of it has to do with like, we do make decisions as much as we can that are more people-oriented. It's a little bit less data-oriented at times, and it is this constant compromise, right? So sometimes it's data-oriented, sometimes it's people-oriented. But at the end of the day, like we do need to make sure we're either breaking even or being profitable. And so and making sure that I'm being paid, my husband's being paid. So like a lot of times small business owners, like either sometimes I hear them taking pay right away and I'm just like, oh, that's good, that's tough, or and a lot of pay. And sometimes I hear like nothing for a very long time, right? And that was us for a little bit, for like more than I'd want it to be. But like now we are reaping the benefits of it. And so really what it came down to is like the first shop, it cost us about $55,000 to start up, which is very low for a brick and mortar. And so that like, and having low debt, that really helped us to kind of build. And it was in having our first like team members that I realized that like, okay, like one coffee shop could probably make a living for Angel and I, but it couldn't make that great of a living for the people on my team. And so within 2 years, we're like, we need to expand if we're going to start making like more livable wages across the board. And so, year 2, we start planning, like growing. And by year 3, we suddenly have 3 cafes, and manufacturing. And so, that really broadened the scale of what we were able to accomplish. But I would say going from one shop to becoming a coffee company was probably like years 3, 4, and 5, probably the hardest, like even more than the pandemic for me, in terms of just like having one shop. I was so involved, we talked a lot about values. The team was very like there because of like me and Angelo. But then when we, essentially spread and had, shops can be equivalent to children in some way. And it's like we had multiple children suddenly, and it's like, how do we do all this? It was a huge pain point. Like, wow. But I remember there was like around year 4 to 5. My leadership team sat me down and they're just like, we believe in this. We don't want to leave, but if something doesn't change, like we'll leave, right? And that kicked my butt into gear of like, I need to figure out what the issues are. Like, I need to be waking up with like the openers at 6 a.m. and figure out what's happening and make sure we have the right leaders and start seeing start putting the right people in the right places. And so that really, we were in full motion of that, and we're about a year into some of those changes when the pandemic hit. And so we were just coming out of like probably one of the harder times for us. And then when the pandemic hit, like, I mean, for better or worse, I think that my leadership does thrive during like moments of like the unknown and chaos. And so we closed one day. We had 3 cafes at this point, and we're all, everything's closed. People are unsure about their jobs. They're trying to figure out what their lives are with my team. And I sit down with my leadership team, sit down on Zoom, and we're just like, what are we doing? And we decided that we were gonna open our one cafe through a window, and that all the other cafes would close, and we would talk to the whole team and say, this is how many hours we have. Let's divide and conquer based upon how much we think, like, how much every person needs. And some people self-selected out because of health or because of, they were moving because of the situation. And we were able to not have to let go of anyone. Everyone took what they could get and stayed within a community of people that were synergistic during a time in which it was incredibly isolating. We were the only cafe open for 3 months through that one window. It was absurdly busy because, like, what else is anyone gonna do? And so it'd be like 100 lattes in line and wait for an hour, unfortunately. But it was a moment where, like, I think the community internally and externally could see that, like, when things get really rough, we'll put our money where our mouth is. And I will say that was a risk that, like, if things like PPP didn't come through, like, in making people-oriented decisions, it would have been hard to stay afloat. But like, government grants like that helped incentivize us to continue putting our people first. And I think that's what's caused us at this point to have better retention than we did before the pandemic, even at a time in which retention is really hard for our industry.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've hacked this balance of doing well and doing good, right? I mean, going back to opening your books a little bit, I mean, you put into perspective everything that you said, you integrated a people element. And whether you know that or not, probably not. It's just the way you think that these are your values, and just to know that they're shining through, because that, I think, is something that's naturally coming to you. And so tell us a little bit about the retention part, because I know there are so many people who are listening to this thinking, gosh, I don't know how to hack this retention thing. Like, what is causing people to stay versus go? So what are some things that you feel like you did maybe during the pandemic? Because I feel like the pandemic was kind of a microcosm of a company's leadership and culture. Because it was under pressure. And what I find in working with organizations is typically the true values and the culture comes through during crisis and when people are under pressure. And that's how we are as humans, right? Like, typically, our values come out when we're in chaos or stressed out or under pressure. So what are some things that you did to keep the retention high and people engaged and committed?
Yeah, I think that, like, I mean, the first thing that kind of sticks out to me, especially since, like, 2020, is that, like, it's this kind of fine balance of, like, a lot of times in the, like, leadership, like, room, like, decisions are made based on data, versus leadership going down to, like, wherever the team is and making decisions based on talking to the team, finding that balance. And I think that there are times where I realize that sometimes I am, like, making these decisions in a closed room with, like, other leadership team members who are only looking at the books or only looking at, like, okay, like, where or how things are hitting within a budget. And then when we go and talk to the team and we're like, okay, this is the plan, like, our management team does feel comfortable enough where they'll just be like, hey, like, that makes sense. Like, I understand why we have to do this and how doing X thing will help us do X, Y, and Z. But, like, here are other things to keep in mind. And I think for me, like, I will always try to strike that compromise. And that's something where the question I've been kind of, like, asking myself is, like, what is the profit that I think is, like, reasonable for a kind of company like mine? And, like, not trying to penny pinch as much as possible in every single way, and just be like, based on the data of what I've built so far, like what do I think is actually reasonable and is a good stewardship of like the resources I have versus how much I think I can maximize it, right? So like something like what we do possibly could have up to 20% in profitability. But I think what's really reasonable for what I want to do is 10%. And like that way, everyone can kind of benefit from it. Our team can have good retention and not feel like they're being squeezed for every amount of their labor, right? Like it is, but at the same time, there's that balance. And so like that's kind of where my mindset has been more lately of just like when the pandemic really hit, we made so many people-oriented decisions and not as much data-oriented decisions. And because the past 3 years, there has been grant money, like we've continued to be able to make people-oriented decisions. And it's really been this last year that we've been like, okay, like now let's bring it all together. And like, how can we are in a position of power. And so let's try to build off of like what we have. It's really special. So I think it'll just continue to be that.
What do you think the responsibility of business owners are around those people-oriented decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do think of like a stewardship mentality, right? So like it is one of those things where it's like as a leader, it is hard being in our position, right? It can be, especially if you really are trying to do good and have like these kind of like values embedded into everything that you do, right? Like there's this constant like feeling of like you're being torn apart a little bit, right? Of like what what's the best decision for the long term versus the short term versus an individual versus a group, right? Like there's all these things to keep in mind. But like I think part of being a leader is just like it's not for my team to comfort me, to make me feel better. It is for me to serve them. And like I will try my best to communicate as much as I can. But I also have to put some level of boundaries around that because I know that I can only do so much. And so my thought process is like, I need to make sure I am putting a good amount of self-care into me so I can be the best leader I can be, to not push additional pressure on my team more than like their work actually, requires. And so, yeah.
No, that makes total sense. And I think that's really underrated. The fact that, your position as a leader is one that there is a trickle down effect almost of if you're under stress, if you're feeling squeezed, like that all trickles down.
Yeah.
I also want to talk about the community element because we talked a lot about the idea of the actual position of your business in the community and how I think that, from my perspective, also contributes to your high retention rates.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about how you're thinking about community and your business. And then I'll add in why I think it's important for the culture conversation.
I love that. I love this back and forth. So when we originally created Brewpoint, our mission was to create authentic community spaces. And I remember in business pitches, like people would be like, "What does that even mean?" And I was just like, I don't know, like you've been to a coffee shop before. Right. What do you feel? You feel like this authentic community space. Like we want to create that. And so, I mean, there's, I'm going to say like a random statistic and a random study because I don't know the exact ones, but like it's quite proven that like coffee shops can make communities like happier, right? They're a part of like the equation of a happy community. And it's because of like a space where authentic connections can be made. Like, part of the reason I wanted to start a coffee shop was just like, I loved the thought that like people go to coffee shops who don't drink coffee, right? Like, it's like, it means that when you say, let's go to a coffee shop, it's not, sometimes people are like, I don't drink coffee, but most of the time it's more of a symbol of connection, or a symbol of a space where you feel at home, where you feel like kind of that third space type of like
creature comfort type of.
And so it's like, it's this kind of like, I don't know, it's like this physical, like, space that like makes people feel positive, right? And so the thing that I've been trying to like piece together for myself as I've been doing this for the past 8.5 years with multiple shops is like, really, my business is coffee in terms of what makes me money. Unfortunately, space doesn't make me money, right? Like, I mean, it can, and if I can try to figure out how to do private events or if I can do these other things, but like, I don't need 4,000 square foot like cafes. Like I need like 1,000 or 500, right? Like if people are just buying a product, because when Starbucks, was like we're this third space, right? Like that was their whole model. That's what like people really associated them with and really brought the specialty coffee world into existence. But now their models are all drive-through, and they're condensing all their cafes to have the smallest footprint possible, because what makes money is the drinks, not having as much square footage as possible. So all this being said, like I've been kind of in this mindset of like authentic community space matters, connections matter. They're a huge asset to community building and economic development. But who's paying for it? Like, should it be a business owner like me? Because if I'm looking at my books and things are already tight, like the difference between a 4,000 square foot space and 1,000 is a big difference. Should it be like, should you combine it with like a Capital One, right? Like but then how does that change the authenticity of the space? And do people come to it the same way? Yeah. Should it be a space that's sponsored by a big entity? Can you do something like that where you can essentially take the culture and make sure it's preserved while still getting sponsorship money and benefits for that sponsor through other means? And so one thing that I've been fixated on, because part of Brewpoint's success has been partnering with like the municipality of Elmhurst. Like our 4,000 square foot space had a good amount of TIF money. And I could not imagine trying to take that on as like pure debt. And to clarify, TIF money, just to make it easy, is essentially kind of like a grant, right? Like it had parameters, it had things that were different, but it wasn't money that I had to pay back in a normal way. And so, so like that is the reason why I think I could have a 4,000 square foot space, and that is why I think that space can change the community. But should the municipality be it? Possibly. Like then it's taxpayer dollars, right?
Right.
So,
and that's where I think we have to think about. You mentioned the ecosystem of your organization, but your ecosystem includes other elements, other systems that's feeding into it and is feeding back in. Yeah. And so I think sometimes as business owners, we think about our system only, right? And it's a container. And I think we have an opportunity to think about all these other systems and how they work together. Coffee shop, for example, and how that impacts things like urban planning or human-centered design and how it fits into the community. But tell us a bit more about how your employees are interacting with that idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is one of those interesting things where it's like this cyclical system, right? Because like specifically the retention in my cafes in Elmhurst, and the amount of applicants that we get, whether or not we're hiring is like, it's been mind-blowing over this past couple of years. And a lot of it has to do, I mean, you could look through every application because there's like this little box of like, why are you applying to Brewpoint? And it's like, it's their story of what Brewpoint has meant to them. Like, it is literally of like, I came to the shop, this is what happened, this is how I felt, like, or I had this drink and I drive 30 minutes like every week to get it, right? Like, it is through the experience that like we get like more and more applicants. And then people I mean, I think my team is a big reason why people also apply, because they're happy. And then them being happy and them having that engagement with the community, like it just kind of keeps feeding itself.
Right.
And so by no means do I want to say any of these things are perfect, because I know like I think part of our strength is the fact that like we know that there's many things that we can always grow in, and we try to do that on a regular basis. But that is a big part of like the team, the community, and the cyclical nature of how our community becomes our team.
Right. Yeah. And how people are interacting with each other, how your employees are interacting with their customers. Yeah. There's a connection to your values, which I think you mentioned earlier. Yeah. So I kind of want to summarize, because we're going to wrap up a little bit here, because I mean, we could talk all day. Yeah. We could have like 4 episodes, but I think some of the things that really are highlighted for me when I hear your story and hear about Brewpoint, because I know we were having this conversation earlier, and you're like, retention is up. we don't know exactly why. We know we've done some things right, but I think first and foremost, you're listening to the community, but also your employees as a community. So I think you're, visualizing kind of this ripple effect and how these things interact with each other. And I think the tactic of listening authentically is really, really important. Yeah. Stepping aside as the business owner and saying, how can we create an equitable experience, especially during the pandemic when people needed different things? So I think this idea of equity and learning about people's human beings is a huge part of it. I think also the way you treated your employees during the pandemic probably catapulted your culture forward by 10 times because everybody was watching you and your leadership team at that time. So that was a pure trust building activity. And you did everything right. you were people oriented and you built that trust, which I think is so, so important. And then lastly, the interaction with the community. I think thinking about customer experience and employee experience needs to be gelled together because your customers create an experience for your employees as well. Yeah. And then how you're interacting with the community and how people see themselves in the community and living those values, I think is all contributing to the amazing culture that you've built at Brewpoint. And I just want to thank you for sharing your story. And I'm sure we're going to have you back on at some point to talk about, there's so many things we could talk about, but I think at the core of this is your value system. And that's something that shines through from you as a founder, as an owner, and then ripples into all the stakeholders that you're working with. So just thank you for all the work you do.
Yeah, thank you for that summary and for the work you do. Like I mentioned, I've been following you for a little bit and I was just like, we have to be friends. I've really enjoyed getting to know you over these past couple months and just as much as I, tried to put my money where my mouth is, I feel like it's been awesome to have another kindred spirit do the same and have that camaraderie. So thank you for having me on this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a demonstration that you can do well and do good. Yeah. So thank you for doing well and doing good for your people, for the community, and for everyone who enjoys your amazing, delicious coffee.
Thank you so much.